We have been through a few iterations, and as we've alluded to, we're officially in the City of Dallas planning and zoning process now. So we're starting to get feedback from city staff as well about things like traffic, crosswalks, the very particular details of the project. So I won't bore you with getting into a lot of that, other than to say, I think the general consensus now that we would all agree, and we have a second traffic engineer now, DeShazo and Associates is investigating not just our first traffic report, but actually expanding a little bit beyond the campus. We've had recommendations for that, so we're having that report as well to look at traffic impact on the neighborhood. But the general idea right now is think of it as a one-way loop around the building that Wentwood travels only westbound. Airline we don't affect, that's a two-way street, but Northwest Parkway and Durham essentially would travel clockwise around the site during morning pickup and drop-off. Simplest way to think about it to help alleviate the idea of someone cutting up Durham and trying to get in front of the queue line and starting a riot is the easiest way to think of it. So in general terms, site arrangements very much the same as we talked about last time. Athletic fields to the northern end, equipment deliveries, food service deliveries, and fire lane access required off of Northwest Parkway. You're seeing a little bit more development inside. I didn't bring you a fully developed landscape plan. This sells it a little bit short. This will comply with City of Dallas standards for landscape, which is, I'll say, more robust than you currently have at your current elementary schools. So imagine foundation plantings around just about the entire perimeter of the building, as well as tree replacement with larger caliper trees and that sort of thing. Walking you back through the floor plan very quickly, because this is all very much the same. If you remember, the building is, three-level building, 3 separate floor plans, parking garage. One change I'll point out to you in the floor plan very simply is when you look at this front entry area. If you remember last time, the front entry had more of a sweeping presence to it. We got a lot of feedback, and frankly we had a chance to rework that a bit because I was beginning to congest our front door. Our front door ended up being about this width that we had here, and while it looked great from the exterior, it was starting to be a little bit confining on the inside. So with some feedback and a little bit of chance to rework, we've been able to broaden this out a bit, still have the same function. So administrative is still immediately to your right as you enter the building. You're in a secure vestibule. You have to enter into the admin space. And then the library is still above the admin space. So you can see in the second floor plan, the library begins to project out where the radius was before. Same square footage as it was before. I know it looks different between a radius form and the rectangular form. Same square footage, a little bit different arrangement. Still allowing something that you don't have at all your campuses that frankly everyone noticed when they went on tours. When you walk into any other school, for the most part now, there's this idea of volume. And when you walk into Bradfield and UP, what you feel is it's a single-story building. So the opportunity here is still that as you walk in, you have a higher volume right in that front entry piece. It immediately starts to step down to go back more towards student scale, but it gives you a little bit of feeling of expansion at the front door and then scales down for students back behind that. And then third floors, as we've talked about, the classroom pods are the same. A lot more development. Gina, Tim, quite a few people have been involved. That's where our bulk of the work has been in the last month, is really working out the details of casework, what kind of cubbies, where's the teaching wall, what kind of teaching wall, what goes on in the flex spaces, what those spaces start to design out like. So that's where the bulk of the work has been developing, but still the same general ideas, 2 grade level pods per floor with the central flex space, restrooms on each floor and staff restrooms, and grade level storage on each floor. Everything that we gathered in pre-design. Really, it's been more about detail in the last month, and then working on that front entry piece has been a lot of feedback and kind of a feedback loop going on with that specifically. Just to remind you, this is that general core organization. Don't worry, I'm not saying this is your furniture and it's furniture anarchy. This was intended to start a conversation, and our interiors group has been working in depth with Skip and his team also to talk about what the interior of the space should lay out like. So, I'll give you an idea of the feel of the flex space. We haven't presented this to staff yet, so these are early concept imagery that we're going to be bringing later this week to start to talk about what those flex spaces start to feel like. You get an idea here. For instance, there's a classroom. You see the classroom doors. Some classrooms have more visibility into the flex space. They all have visibility into the flex space, but it's a question of some classes have more, some have less. And a lot of that's about, you don't need to see everything in the flex space from every classroom, but you do need to know that there's oversight out in that classroom space. So These are initial concepts. I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback. Your team has been very good at giving feedback, so don't get married to the finishes and the imagery, but I can tell you renderings never do this justice. So the presentations we'll be making the next week or so will have physical materials that people can touch and feel and see, because that really helps rendering start to come to life here. But the goal is to give your flexibility of different types of seating environments, different type of interaction environments, and really start to warm the interior also now versus I mean, we all know this is a school ceiling, right? A 2x2 acoustical ceiling is a school ceiling. Well, maybe it is in the classrooms, but maybe those spaces start to have ceiling finishes even that start to distinguish them as a special space, that the grade levels now have a house or a living room, because that's how we've been referring to it. It's really sort of the grade level living room. So I'm sure we'll get feedback, and we'll come back at that. Initial concepts of, this gives you an idea of the dining room. You can see kind of stage at the far end. If you remember, there's the stage, the LGI, and an operable wall between the large group instruction and the cafeteria. Right now in this image, it's open, and you're kind of standing halfway through the cafeteria, so you're not getting a full image of it also. We need to have a lot of conversation about this, because acoustically, this is always an issue for staff of when you have a lot of young children in there. It's a very active space acoustically. And so you start to see a little bit different acoustical treatments on walls and ceilings. The goal is to start breaking up this idea of it's an institutional building. It is a school, but there is an opportunity to introduce other materials and start to soften the interior. We've had a lot of feedback on soften the exterior. A lot of the focus has been for us also, how do we make this a very relatable space for students, you know, K through 4 on the interior as well. So also with a grain of salt, staff hasn't seen it, and I'm sure we'll have some changes in feedback, but that's really what we'll focus on in the next 4 weeks, is kind of honing in on the interior. Exterior, very much the same, you know, quick fly around. I will say this elevation wasn't purely symmetrical last time, and I think most people probably didn't notice that. That was one comment we had, so we spent some time making this portion of the building symmetrical about the center axis. If I hadn't pointed that out to you, you'd think that's the same rendering you saw last time, but there's been a little bit of finessing to go with that. Again, the courtyard, we've actually had an opportunity to start developing some ideas in there. This is a great space, and I didn't talk about some of the, I'll say environmental, but really they're cost-saving / environmental features. For instance, introducing elements of rainwater harvesting, where you can capture rainwater from the building and use it for the garden. What that requires is a storage system to be able to use that. So you have the added benefit of having water for the garden, but you also have a science lesson built into it pretty easily. Rooftop I didn't mention as well last time, but there is a thought we would like to price at least photovoltaic panels for the roof. Now, none of that is visible. The roof is completely screened. But for your payback, for your M&O dollars, most districts will run a comparison and say, yeah, it's about a 15-year payback. But if I take your recapture dollars and run your numbers, it's about a 5 to 7 year payback before those PV panels really start to make, and it makes a huge difference on the other wallet, right? The O&M side of the ledger versus the INS side of the budget. So that is something that's being entertained. We haven't brought it up a lot because frankly I'm conservative financially, and I'm worried about whether I can get it in there. It's certainly planned to be in there if we can all make it work financially, and I think it makes a lot of sense for you long term on the O&M side of the ledger as well. You'll see a little bit of change on the gymnasium. For those of you who've seen me present this a million times, I keep talking about we need to pare down the windows on the east side of the gym. The gym teacher finally got to the team, and sure enough, we've pared down the windows on the east side of the gym. But what we've also introduced are, it's really hard to see here, they're actually doors directly out of the gymnasium as well. And that's north light, and we talked about last time, north light, non-glare, no solar gain for the most part. And we did have some concern that going back out in the corridor to come out to the gym might be problematic. So that's a tweak that's been made on the northern face of the building. And again, you see that outdoor covered dining area outside of the student cafeteria as well. And then finally on approach, one thing we did hear a lot of feedback on was the idea of entry, and that's really, I think, what people resonate with your elementary schools, is the prominence of the front entry at Bradfield and UP. It's this grand cast stone with detail. And this widening the entry gave us a chance to actually put a little bit more detail into this space. Actually, you see these shadow figures above this as well. It also gave us an opportunity to do a small outdoor area that's adjacent to the library. So from the second floor of the library, right by the circulation desk, there's a door. So it's not anybody going out there, but there's an opportunity for students to take a book, or a group of students take a book and step out on a cover or an outdoor area just above the front door space, which I think starts to give this building that unique identity that we keep hearing. All of our schools have unique identity. What's number 5 going to be? I think the outside courtyard, and then even elements like this start to do it. From a pragmatic standpoint, this in the radius was one of the successes we had of a way to get students closer out to the curb, and so you still have, because the library mass projects over the administrative mass, you still have effectively a covered walkway all the way to this point. Now, you still have a bit of a sprint between there and the curb. If that becomes critical, you can start to look at adding an element that does that, but at least this gives us a queuing area. To your other schools, you queue in the gyms right now, but our gym is all the way at the north end of the queue zone, so probably not your most practical. This becomes a great alternative to allow queuing during inclement weather. Still have students under cover and ready for parents to work through that queuing pattern that we described last time. This gives you a little bit better idea of kind of the differentiation of the mass at the front door. It also gets away from it being just a two-story mass without any surface texture to it. It gives you a chance to have a little bit more texture to it. Same materiality. I did bring some brick sample blends, and I didn't bring them to you. I wasn't real happy with the first round of sample blends we talked, so we'll keep trying at that. But I had a good conversation, like we said, about brick texture, what that looks like. But I think the palette is pretty much determined as it's red brick in the largest parenthetical statement I can make. We don't know what that blend looks like. And then a stone element, and we're still putting together imagery of whether that's all smooth stone to cut stone or it's a rusticated stone with a smooth stone band on it. So that's the next level of detail we're still working toward. You'll notice we're not taking the stone all the way up. In the last imagery, we had the stone all the way up. And I think we got a lot of feedback on that as well, that it tended to separate the two sides of the building. So I'll say we've had no shortage of input. And so that's always fun to balance, right? Because you're never going to make everybody happy. I mean, Jim's very good at explaining that to people, but I do think a lot of the input we've gotten is it's all in the best interest of the district. And so we've tried very hard to incorporate as much of that as we can until we get to areas where they're at odds with each other. So we're still negotiating that process, but I do think with the front imagery, at least in the recap meetings we did a week ago, I think we've got a lot more positive traction around kind of the front element of the building at this point. I do think this rendering is showing, for instance, a solid garage door. I think we're at the point now, I think I was indeterminate last time. Is that a garage door? Is it? That is a solid garage door. The security concern that Mark has brought up and we're working through his staff is we really would like that door to essentially be closed at all times. And so that means you'll probably have think of it as a toll tag system if you're a teacher. When you approach, door opens, door closes back down. So you're not closing it at the end of the day. Our current thinking is you're doing that with every cycle. And it may be that you could open it between 7 and 7:30. So all staff comes in and then closes. So you're not having to repair a rapid rise door. Is Tim's nodding. On the O&M side of the budget, the money I saved you on the electric, you'll pay to fix that door. So we have to be smart about that. But those are the nuances we've been working on it's been 4 weeks since we were here last. It's moving rapidly, but I do think those elements are starting to come into sharper focus.